Could we all rise for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Here.
Mr. G,
Here.
Mr. Posnell,
Here.
Mr. Robinson,
Here.
Mr. Sanders,
Here.
Mrs. Schrader,
Here.
Mr. Sears, Mr. Sullivan,
Here.
Mr. Tillman.
Here.
9 members present.
Thank you. A reminder to please silence your cell phones during the meeting. And this will be the first opportunity for public comment. All comments and questions will be addressed to the president. Board and staff members will not normally respond to comments or questions during the meeting unless recognized by the president for this purpose. Comments will be limited at the discretion of the president to 5 minutes or less. Do we have any?
Good evening. My name is Dave Arnold. I live at South Royal Street in right near the old Kmart. I've been there since 2019. I recently became aware of a book that a teacher had used in fall of 2021 in her class. The teacher's name was Oathout, if I'm saying it right, Oathout. The class, I believe, was an English class, and the students were to read a book and do a report about that book. The book was a fictional book titled All American Boys. I have it here. And yes, I read it. It's a story of a black youth who was mistakenly arrested for shoplifting in a store. He was then arrested and beaten and injured to the point that he was hospitalized. This caused friction between his family and the students at his school. Members of the community then had to pick sides to support the student or the police officer who was white. My question about this situation is I believe students should be given a choice on topics to do their report on. This book is not indicative of law enforcement in this area. Are there bad cops? Yes. Students should be taught how to file a complaint and how to cooperate with a police officer when they have an encounter with one while preserving his or her constitutional rights. The goal of every police encounter is both for the officer and the citizen to leave the encounter uninjured. Most police officers in York County have body cameras, and most citizens have a cell phone in which they can record an encounter if needed. However, when officers deal with some persons, they are drunk, under the influence of drugs, or they may have a mental issue going on. This sometimes leads to frictions, situations where the officers must use force to make a legal arrest. I have been employed as a law enforcement officer for over 35 years, and I've dedicated my life to my profession. I've been involved in firing bad cops, so I am a believer that every person should be treated fairly. I also know from my law enforcement and life experience that every profession has its bad actors. Here I have a copy of a book based on the true story of a female teacher who had a sexual relationship with a teenage student. Does this mean all teachers are bad? No. My point is that our youth deserve to be provided with both sides of the story. 98% of police officers I have worked with are honorable, good people. I'm fairly sure that the same applies to teachers, lawyers, bankers, religious people, etc. So if this school district is going to present this book as a book for students to learn from, which is fictional, perhaps they could also present a book to the students that details the good works that officers have done. There's a wall in Washington, D.C. with the names of over 20,000 officers' names who've died in the line of duty. I know at least 3 of these names are police officers from York County. These officers gave their lives to enforce the laws of our nation. I thank you for your attention and request that this choice be given to students if this type of book is presented in the classroom in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. We have a link to the minutes of the planning committee meeting that was conducted on March 14th, 2021. Unless anybody has any changes or corrections, I will offer them to be approved as submitted. Mr. Sears.
Good evening, Mr. Posnell. This evening, we have again a consent agenda for the approval of the financial reports as of February 28, 2022. Would any member of the board like any of these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the board moves approval of the below mentioned items.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a second. Questions or comments? I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you. The board met in executive session on March 23rd, 2022 at 6 p.m. as permitted by Section 707 of the Sunshine Act for the purpose of discussing personnel. No official action was taken. The board also met on March 24th, 2022 at 4 p.m. and March 28th at 5:30 p.m. for the same reasons for personnel actions, and no official action was taken. Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Posnell. Tonight, the first item under the superintendent's report is the administration recommends board approval of the East York Elementary School facility dog proposal at no cost to the district. This was discussed last week, and we're looking for action tonight.
Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you. And tonight we have Mrs. Albright and Dr. Snedden, who will talk about their buildings, and then I'll be talking a little bit about student achievement.
Nick, that's actually the last slide. Do you mind moving it back? Thank you. All right. So thank you. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to meet, I'm Mrs. Albright, Amanda Albright. It's wonderful to see all of you today. So I'm just going to highlight a few things that are happening at YES. And thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share. Oh, too far. Clicker is a little happy, or maybe it's me. All right, so over the summer, we had the opportunity to visit many of our buildings. When you came to Yorkshire, a lot of you, we talked about this common space or this common area that each of the grade levels have. It was really hard to tell or see what we could use that space for when it's the middle of the summer and we're still putting pieces back together in a building. So I wanted to kind of highlight what's happening here. This is our kindergarten common area. What our teachers have done is use this space for thematic units that tie into their curriculum and what they're doing within each of the classrooms. So a lot of their planning together has been pulling out and highlighting what's happening in the classroom, but giving that shared experience for all of our kindergarten students in their common area. So it's focused around the concept of play, but structured play revolving under a theme. This was more of an Arctic theme. So we have some students who are dramatizing through play and actually performing a play. The students up on the right-hand corner are creating habitats through different materials for their Arctic animals. And the kids down at the bottom are constructing the same thing out of building blocks. Here we have some sensory pieces. The students on the left that's paper. So no worries, facilities. It's paper, not sand or anything crazy. And they're digging in there, exploring, lots of great things that are happening sensory-wise. Top right is also another picture of those habitats being created by some of our kindergarten students. And the bottom portion, they've constructed their own restaurant where they're creating menus and taking orders. It's really great to see. There was a picture of a play ice skating rink that they created. I was in that picture, so I chose not to share that with you as I was skating around the floor in my socks. Oh, too far. Nick, I should just let you click for me. All right, so here we have our second and first grade classrooms or common areas. You see a lot of small group instruction happening here in all of those parts. It also occurs in the kindergarten area. There are 2 intervention tables similar to the one that you see at the bottom right-hand corner that are being used in the kindergarten as well. So that is an option for them. But we have our first grade and our second grade working hard with small groups and one-on-one instruction, which is fantastic to be able to use that. And we, as you can see, there are a lot of instruction happening in small groups at the same time. Today, I have the opportunity to explore in a science experiment that was happening at the second grade hallway. They were observing fish, talking about, the habitats. The main purpose was how do fish breathe underwater. So that's what we were exploring, and it was really cool to see. So she had lots of different stations happening, and the kids were able to do that, and then some observation tanks. So that's our grade level common areas. I just wanted to kind of give you a glimpse as to how those places were being used, because they look a lot different than they did when we were visiting in the summer. And it's a great option for us here at Yorkshire. Next thing I'd like to highlight that's happening at Yorkshire are our good news calls. So often I know parents kind of hesitate and cringe when they see our phone number come over their phone, because it's either my kid is sick or so good news calls are where teachers get to nominate students for really anything, anything that they want, like a variety of reasons, where it's social growth, academic growth, or just for being an all-around great kid. And then I have the privilege and pleasure of actually getting to make that phone call. So students get to come down, we make it together, we go on speakerphone. I automatically tell them it's good news right away to ease any concern. And then we just talk through all the great things that their child is doing and just celebrate together. So it's one of my favorite parts of the day. That and reading to the kids are my favorite parts of the day. So here are just a few of our friends that have come down for good news calls. And lastly, in January, we started back up with our assemblies and bringing our community together, our Yorkshire community together for a pep rally. I'm going to ask you again at the end, but I'm going to invite you to come down for a pep rally at the end of the month. We're having ours on Wednesday if you're interested, but you have to be willing to dance and have some fun. So we celebrate all the learning that's happening with a slideshow of pictures to highlight the kiddos. We talk about all their great growth, and then we're a little silly together. Teachers are up there dancing. Kids, you see the floss on one side, you see the chicken dance on the other, and we just have a little bit of fun together and be in that community at Yorkshire. But I don't send them back as excited as this. I make sure we calm before we go back, and we have a little bit mindful moment. I capture this picture, and it is one of my favorites, because we end the way we begin with just a reflection on our last month, and then we think about how we want to either change or grow with a month ahead. And this little lady there did a great job as her mindful moment. So I send them back to class, ready to learn, ready to engage, and ready to start a new month of learning and growing together. So that's a little bit of what's happening at Yorkshire. If you would like to come down, it's the end of the day, 2:55-ish Wednesday. Come on down and join us. We'll have some fun together. But I'd love to have you there. And that ends my report.
Thank you. Dr. Snedden.
All right. Excuse me. Good evening, board. Fortunately, I'm not feeling very well, but the good news is I brought 2 awesome middle school students here that are actually going to do my presentation for me, because I wanted to find a way to be able to recognize their hard work at the science fair this year. So I'm going to ask first for Carter Weems to come up. Carter was the reserve grand champion for York County, and he is the son of Beth and Kevin Weems.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Carter Weems, and I won Reserve Grand Champion at the York County Science and Engineering Fair by making a project titled What is the best tire pressure for riding a bike? So to conduct this experiment, I used my bike and put a person on it and pulled it along with a spring scale. So basically this measured how much resistance it took to pull the bike, and this told me what tire pressure was the best. So and best and most efficient. So then I repeated this experiment with multiple bike tire pressures and eventually found the best one.
And I told them I would ask them each a question. So Carter, my question for you is, what have you gained as a student by doing this project?
So by doing the project taught me how to manage my time. It was over multiple months, and we didn't get very many. It was very individual. We didn't get very much direction as to how to do it.
So what was the best tire pressure? Don't leave us hanging.
I think it was around. So it was actually the highest that I had was technically the best, but I found that safety was a key factor, and so it was around 30 to 40 psi was the best.
Good deal. Thank you.
All right. And our next student presenter is Emma Bates. Emma is also an 8th grade student. Emma was the York County Grand Champion for the junior division. So Emma, if you want to come up, Emma is the daughter of Denise and Andrew Bates.
Hi, I'm Emma Bates, and I won the Reserve Grand Champion at the York County Science and Engineering Fair, and my project was on the Stroop effect, which models the cognitive interference that takes place when reading the color of a color word, as opposed to reading the color word itself. So if you see on the slide over here, on the bottom, there's a slide that says green, but is written in red. That would have been read as red, which it takes a lot longer for the brain to process that because we read much faster than we identify colors. And I use statistics to verify this outcome. It was confirmed through that.
Right, perfect. And I am going to share these with you. I mean, if you come over to our building, and I encourage you to do so, and you walk our hallways, all of the projects are on display throughout the building, so you can see the great work that the students are doing. But for Emma, as we get ready to send you to Dr. Ellis, how has this prepared you?
I gained a much greater understanding of how to go through the process of the scientific method, and just the entire process of how to do a long-term project. And I also just want to thank middle school for allowing us to do the science fair, because it was a very big learning opportunity. Thank you.
All right. So again, I just wanted to highlight some of the great work our students are doing, and got me off the hook a little bit and not feeling so well. So thank you, board.
Smart guy.
Thank you, Dr. Snedden. Okay, Pennsylvania Department of Education recently released student achievement data. If Nick, if you could bring those slides up. And we're going to use some colors in our presentation, but not in the same way that was used in the science fair project. In the red circle, I'll just go briefly give you an overview of how these charts and tables are going to work going forward. The top row is the state average for each of the grades, and this happens to be English Language Arts, ELA. So you can see that, for example, for grade 3, you can see that the state average was 58.9%. York Suburban proficiency level was 79.9, and the 3rd grade cohort at York Suburban ranked 44th out of 499 school districts in Pennsylvania, and that put it at the 91st percentile. So the 3rd graders at York Suburban outperformed 91% of the other 3rd grades in the state. So that's how this table is going to work. You can look across. Nick, if you hit that one more time, please, and another time. At the bottom 2 rows that were just added, you can have the county average. You'll see there in the gray, and where the bottom row is where York Suburban ranked in the county for those particular grade levels. I'll just leave that there for a few seconds so you can read it over. And math, the same thing. You might as well put the county one on there too, Nick. And this is the table for science. And science is only tested in grades 4 and 8 for the PSSAs. Okay, now we have we wanted to see how well we did or did not do through the pandemic. So we took the 2019 results and compared it to the 2021 results. And in this row you see here, in the gray boxes is the 2019 results for each of the grades. And then in the to the right side of the table, you can see the proficiency level for grade 3, for example, was 79.9%, which is 2.9 percentage points lower than it was in 2019. And you can see in 4th grade went down 6 percentage points. And all schools in Pennsylvania pretty much declined over this time period. But what's interesting is in 5th grade, our proficiency level actually improved by 4.1 percentage points. And that is the only instance where we had an improvement over 2019. Go ahead, Nick. And you can see where those scores rank us in Pennsylvania, and you can see where they rank us in the county and when they up and down. So the yellow, the red boxes are negative declines. The green boxes are positive improvements or no change at all. So for example, in 3rd grade, you can see that our rank in the county remained 2nd. And you can see that in some cases, our performance, our students outperformed other schools in Pennsylvania, sometimes by a lot. For example, in 5th grade, with the 79.8 proficiency level, actually improved 56 slots in rankings in schools in PA with 5th grade. And you can see that the percent rankings also improved. We'll let that sit there for a minute or two. And go ahead, click it one more time. And here again, you can see in 6th grade, 6, 7, and 8, how that played out. And for math, you can see while we had a decline in proficiency levels, we actually improved our standing among the state and the county for those grade levels. And for 6th grade, 6, 7, and 8, you can see where we declined in our proficiency from 2019, but we improved our standing statewide in those grade levels. And for science, one more quick, you can see we're also declined in 2019, but improved our standing among schools in the state. These charts and tables will all be on the superintendent's report that will be published online, so you don't need to write anything down. And in summary, we declined in almost every category from 2019. We saw sometimes slight declines, sometimes larger declines, but we improved our standing, our position statewide in almost every category. In fact, 13 out of the 14 measurable categories, York Suburban students improved their standing among the state. Some of those improvements were fairly large, the largest being 130 spots in the rankings. So in general, we saw a decline in performance, but our students performed very well relative to other students in the state. If you have any questions at this time, I'm happy to answer them.
Yep.
Yes.
One of the things that happened statewide, Dr. Williams, was a decline in the number of students who actually took tests. And I think we had, I don't know how significant it was, but some were like 40 and 50% reductions in the numbers of students who took the tests. Would the distribution of ability be roughly the same, even in a smaller population? So in other words, are these numbers really comparable with the 2-year comparison?
The state cautions against really making the comparisons we just made because no one knows the answer to that.
Isn't it something that could be ferreted out by actually looking at the
You'd have-
individual results to see how that distribution
But we
matches
don't have
last?
the individual results of all the other. The individual,
I mean, looking at our results from 2019 compared to our results from 2021. We do have the names
we
of the
could do it
students.
for that. Yeah, we could do it with our own students.
You
We
know,
wouldn't be able
to
to.
see whether there's a skew in the distribution of the ability of the kids who took the tests.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I understand what you're getting at. I'm not sure that there's going to be any value in knowing that.
Well, if they were not comparable populations, in other words, if the kids who took the tests in 2021 came from the top end of the distribution,
Top
from
end of what
2019,
distribution?
of the 2019 distribution,
Okay.
then you wouldn't have the pull from the lower end, and it would make the drop even more dramatic.
But you're comparing this 2021 cohort, we're comparing fourth grade in 21 with fourth grade in 19. So you're not talking about the same students.
I know we're not talking about the same kids, but the distribution of kids who took the test could be determined. Well, in other words, where did they come from relative to where they were before? You've done that with the HUS population, correct? You can identify them.
Yes, but some percentage of them, not all 100% of them took the exams either.
But I understand that, but they're already classified to be in that
They are.
in that cluster.
Yeah.
So how useful are these numbers? That's the real question.
I think when you look relative to everyone else in the state, because they're all taking the same exams and don't all have the same exact participation rate,
It varies dramatically.
and
Yeah.
can vary dramatically. But by and large, the participation rate is higher than I thought it was going to be statewide. So I don't know how much stock you can put in these numbers just yet.
All right, speculate one more thing for me. How much longer will it be before we can do valid comparisons?
I think you're looking at a couple of years yet.
All right, given that, what can we use as a school board that won't take that long? Are there valid measures that we can use now besides these PSSAs?
Well, I'm not sure that the PSSAs are well aligned to the standards. We're using
I know
benchmark
we've had that
exams.
conversation.
Yeah. But we're using benchmark exams that are theoretically aligned to the standards to make sure that our students are being prepared well for what's coming.
I think one of the challenges for all of us is to try to find a baseline that we can depend on year after year after year. And obviously, we can't project something like COVID coming along, but if we have metrics that we develop and that we can count on, I mean, whether they mean anything in relationship to other state metrics is beside the point. They're internally consistent, and they could give us a pretty good handle on movement in ability, even if it didn't measure absolute ability. Does that make sense? Like growth or decline?
Well, remember, this is student achievement, not growth.
Well, I understand
And the
that, but
growth numbers will be more interesting to look at than
they're
achievement.
also based on proficiency, though, aren't they? Movement in proficiency,
For the individual student.
translated to
longitudinally.
grade level. If we can take things like IXL as the,
Yes.
I mean, I'm not saying that we should do proficiency. We need something that's consistent from one year to the next that doesn't depend on, for example, the state deciding that they're going to rewrite the standards or that they're going to rejuggle things so that we have to wait again for these things to settle down to give us some ability to compare year over year or cohort-based statistics.
Yeah, the state is not going to be, except for science, is not going to be doing anything different with the standards. What the state should be doing is looking at whether the assessments are well aligned to those standards.
And you're convinced they're not.
In some grade levels, they're not. I mean,
So
it's pretty obvious to me.
where do we as a board go then for a consistent set of measures that we can use to evaluate the performance of our kids?
Inventing those benchmarks is not a wise use of our time when we have access to benchmarks that we are using.
Is IXL something like that, or am
Yes.
I off base?
No, you're not.
I'm
off
not
base.
saying invent anything. We have that framework, and we have
Right.
the other Acadians tools that
Correct.
we've been introduced to, and I think we're getting more comfortable with.
That's correct.
Okay. You
So-
see,
Those are the tools I think we use to see how we're doing more often than once a
all
year.
right, now how about taking that one step further into the high school, where we seem to have almost nothing other than these arbitrary, I'll say arbitrary selection of subject areas that are measured once and only once, and sometimes years before they're reported.
The high school student achievement exams are really end of course exams.
Mhm.
So it's a different animal than PSSAs.
I understand that, and it's to
And
me practically useless from a board member's perspective.
I don't agree with that at all. I mean, those are the subjects that the state has deemed that we need to have proficiency in, and student either does well in those three areas or not. And they take a course. There's a course that is tied to that subject area, and they take that course, and at the end of that course, they take a final exam. Then they take the Keystone exam. Well, actually, they take the Keystone exam before the final
Well,
exam.
even if we could agree that those are the three correct courses to measure, the the banking and the delay in the report does something that just tears me apart as a number cruncher. Somebody could take an algebra exam, for example, in 8th grade, and we don't see it in our results until that individual's in 11th grade.
That's correct. That's correct.
How in the world do we use that to make decisions? As educators, do you think that's a valid
But
way
we get the individual results soon after they're taken, so we know how well Johnny in 8th grade did on his and where he didn't.
Is that made available to the board?
No.
In the
It's
aggregate,
individual results.
in the aggregate for what was taken in a given year, so that we can see scores in real time, instead of this dragged out for 3 or in some cases 4 years before we actually get to see the impact of Johnny's test.
The reality is if Johnny is an algebra student taking the Keystone exam in 8th grade, they're scoring advanced by and large. It's our best algebra Keystone test takers are at the middle school level.
Well, maybe we need to have this conversation offline, but I'm looking at it from the perspective of somebody that's trying to communicate not only to myself, but to the broader community. And I'm damned if I can do it with the numbers the way they're presented.
Okay. We can have a lengthy conversation offline if you like.
All right. Thank you.
But I understand what you're getting at.
Dr. Williams, first I appreciate the comparison with the rank in PA, because that to me answers one pretty easy question, which is, did we do better or worse than our peers during this time? So I really do like that. I do find that outlier to be weird, especially because of the magnitude of it.
There's two outliers. Which one are you referring to?
The negative outlier. So 8th grade ELA, where we drop 80 positions in comparison to our peers, which seems really odd because in 6th grade ELA, we are 92 better than our peers. Any ideas on what that's showing us, or is that just?
No conclusions yet as to that situation, other than I'm trying to remember what the high on that one was in the state. There was a school system that did do 100%. The state average on that was 19.4% proficiency.
Okay.
So remember how we talked about sometimes the exams may not be well aligned to standards? I don't want to conclude that definitively, but it's something that
That's your gut, is that one's not, we're not aligned, or the standard's not aligned to what we're teaching.
yeah. And for example, in eighth grade
Test's
math,
not aligned to what we're teaching.
in eighth grade math, in 2019, 97% of the schools, I believe, had 60% or lower proficiency level. In 2021, it was almost 99%. So I find it hard to believe that 500 school districts have misaligned their math curriculum. It's more likely that the exam itself is not aligned well to the standards, because we don't teach to the test, contrary to popular belief. We teach to the standards, and then the test is supposed to measure how well we did against those standards.
It's supposed to test the standards.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think I would agree that sitting at this table, we all believe that our students should always be number one in the state. But I think we were also all terrified over the past year and a half as to what was going to happen. And so it is reassuring to look at it in the context of the state where we've grown. So thank you.
You're quite welcome. And that concludes the superintendent. Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to mention. Barry Gerling, Mr. Gerling, our director of facilities, will be retiring on Thursday. So this is his last board meeting. And I just want to thank Barry for all his work and dedication over the 41 years. And you put that together with the time he spent as a student, what are we talking about? 50 some odd years, 54 years, something like that. So we're very grateful for all of your hard work. Thank you, Barry. And as a facilities director, I would prefer that you bring warmer weather to our environment, but we'll let you slide this time. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chulik.
Good evening, board. My first item is the consent agenda. Would any board member like any of these items considered separately? Or are there any questions about any of these items? If not, I would ask that a motion be made to approve the below mentioned items.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Questions, comments? I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item B is a recommendation from the administration to renew the hosted services agreement with Lancaster Lebanon IU 13 to facilitate compliance with employee history review process as required by Act 168 of 2014.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item C is an annual renewal for the GASB 75 valuation and related services through Conrad Siegel. They perform actuaries for post-employment benefits.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Kathy, what's the cost of this?
Just give me 1 second. I don't have that off the top of my head, and I'm not able to pull up the vendor. Can I provide you an update the next meeting?
Sure. Thank you.
Other questions? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item D is a memorandum of agreement for student teaching. This is for the guidance student teacher according to Board Policy 307.
Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Questions? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The item E is a service agreement for us to do our repairs. It is pending solicitor review, and we would ask for a motion.
Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item F is a recommendation from the administration to approve the 22-23 health insurance premium rates at a 7% increase over the current year. And I've laid out what the individual, two-party, and family premium rates are.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item G is a recommendation from the administration to set the 22-23 COBRA rates at the rate hold of 21-22 as set before the board, individual, two-party, and family.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item H is a recommendation for the board to approve the sustainable school gardening system at Indian Rock. It is a partnership with York College of Pennsylvania. It was presented to the Finance Committee on March 16th. The cost is about $2,000 that will be funded through donations.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
I have a question. Will that be open to the children in any of the other elementary buildings, or is this just for Indian Rock? Just curious.
That's a good question. I would have to defer to Dr. Gully, but we can get back to the board.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
I would just like to add that I think this is a real win-win to incorporate college students, mentoring, working with our elementary students. That's a good thing on a lot of levels. So my hat is off to those who thought it up and organized it, and I look forward to being a part of its success. Thank you.
I think that this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item I is a recommendation from the administration to authorize the business office to advertise and solicit proposals for waste management services.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
I have a question. I guess this implies that we have our own contract with Waste Management and we're not subject to the townships in which we operate.
This would be considered a contracted service where we could go out and find proposals. We've elected not to do a bid because we don't want to go with the lowest bidder. We want to make sure that there is a performance rating.
Other questions? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Under the informational report, you have the food service dining report and the sales report. Are there any questions on either one of those reports? The second item is a donation of $1,500 from the Poly Family Fund Foundation to the middle school. And we thank all of our donors for their donations. And that concludes the business office report.
Thank you. Ms. Casey, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
All right. So we have a pretty busy week at the high school in terms of our athletics, especially tomorrow, actually. Girls lacrosse has a home game against Dallastown at 5:30 and also a home game against Southwestern on Thursday at the same time. Tomorrow, baseball has a game against Dallastown at 4. Tennis has a home game against Spring Grove at 4. Track has a meet against Susquehannock at 4. And on Friday, they have their Herb Schmidt relays at 4 as well. And then boys volleyball has a home game on Thursday against Central at 7. And for our upcoming events, we just had our Minithon Spirit Week to kind of raise awareness for our Minithon. And our event is on April 8th. And also we've been selling our prom tickets, and those have been going pretty quickly these past couple of weeks and are on sale until April 1st. And finally, I have some achievements that are to be recognized. So a group of our students went to the FCCLA State Conference last week, and 5 of our students earned medals there, one of which being a gold medal won by Annie Connolly, and silver medals won by Kiani Bear, Noah Gilman, Liz Heisey, and Riley Greenberg. And that is all I have.
Thanks very much.
Yep.
Personnel Committee, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Posnell. We have 4 items for your consideration tonight, starting with the consent agenda. You have before you the personnel report. Would any board member like any of these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Item 2, the administration recommends the board approve the elimination of the YSMS Autistic Support Program effective for the 2022-23 school year. This program will be replaced with an intensive learning support program. The current autistic support teacher will be reassigned.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Item 3, the administration recommends the board approve the creation of a YSMS Intensive Learning Support Program effective for the 2022-23 school year.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Item 4, the administration recommends the board approve the creation of an intensive learning support teacher effective for the 2022-23 school year.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Mr. Toman.
Good evening. The Policy Committee recommends board approval of the following policy revisions. Policy 006, meetings. Policy 201, admission of beginners. Policy 610, purchases subject to bid quotation. Policy 611, purchases budgeted. Policy 626, federal fiscal compliance. And Policy 903, public participation in board meetings. Are there any questions on any of these policies?
Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Now, questions or comments? Hearing none, I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you. Mr. Sears.
Thank you, Mr. Posnell. Excuse me. The Property and Finance Committee met on March 16th at 5 o'clock. 6 board members were present. And first order of business, as usual, was to approve minutes. We approved the minutes of November 1st. Mrs. Chichuli gave us her administrator report, starting with the discussion of the Horticulture Club, which was approved this evening. We had a presentation from Toby Putt of AIA relative to our premium projections for the 2022-23 school year. Those were approved earlier this evening. They reflect a 7% increase over the current year's premium. Employee contributions for medical and dental insurance will remain at 10% of the cost of the medical and dental coverage to the employer. Mr. Putt also discussed the changing requirements to qualify for high deductible designation in our health plan and brought forward to the board some options under the Highmark Choice Blue platform, which provides 3 tiers of coverage instead of 2. It would include an enhanced network of providers, including WellSpan, Penn State Health, Hershey, Lancaster General, and that would give our employees better pricing when utilizing services through these providers. Finance and operations, Mr. Gerling provided an update on the central plant chiller, reported that due to a delay in major components, Trane, the supplier, will provide a rental unit by the end of April at no cost to the district. The unit has enough capacity to meet our cooling needs through the end of the school year if necessary. Mrs. Chichuli discussed the transportation RFP. 2 bidders came with cost projections increases of 12.8% and 40% over our current year costs. Committee authorized Mrs. Chichuli to contact vendors directly to see if anything could be done to reduce that proposed increase. Excuse me. Mrs. Fry discussed the food service RFP and the decision to delay the $1 per hour wage increase that was authorized by the board while the RFP is in process. We then turned to budget development. Mrs. Chichuli facilitated a spirited discussion of the budget development process to date. Second round cuts still leave the district about $4.5 million in the red. The committee provided parameters to the administration that would split the deficit into 3 parts of $1.5 million each, coming from local property tax increases, $1.5 million from additional expense reductions, and another $1.5 million from the general fund balance. We then turned to public comment. Dr. Don Bentavegna said that it was nice to hear discussion during a meeting, and as discussions of this nature rarely occur during meetings of the whole. She advised the district to work with parents to overcome feelings among parents about cyber charter enrollment. She observed that many parents have been recommending cyber charter schools to each other, and that's a point of contention. Our next meeting is May 2nd, 2022 at 5 p.m. in the boardroom. We adjourn the meeting at 7:21 p.m.
Joel, just for clarification, the $1.5 million tax increase, what does that take us to for our allowable tax increase for this year?
3.83.
Is that the max?
4 is the max.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions? Dr. Sullivan.
Good evening. The committee met on March 21st. We approved the minutes of the November 15th meeting of academic standards and curriculum. Those are linked in tonight's agenda. The committee also heard presentations on the Future Ready PA Index, which overall is inclusive of state assessments, on-track measures, and college and career measures. There is a live link to the site from the committee agenda page from last week. There was a presentation of a long inventory of technology resources used by the district for everything from classroom learning activities to assessment to building management and business operations. These inventories are valuable for a variety of reasons, including identification of potential redundancies, as well as financial planning for licensing costs and awareness of the district's cybersecurity posture. There is also a live link to that sheet from the committee agenda page from last week. The committee heard presentations from administrators on the K through 12 guidance plan, which is on the full board agenda for tonight. It is a very comprehensive document that I would urge all district parents to read. A link is also provided on the committee agenda, and we have a live link on tonight's agenda as well. We got an update on curriculum writing, teaching, and assessment. The last of these including benchmarking data from Acadience for the elementary schools and from multiple different systems used at the middle school. We discussed how these assessment data are collected, what they mean, how they are used, and how previously identified patterns of learning loss are being addressed. Some of the data use discussions are relevant to the next item on data warehousing. There are links to the 2 benchmarking presentations from the 2 school levels in the committee agenda. We also discussed the Ed Insight Data Warehouse, which is on the overall board agenda tonight. We talked about costs, the term of the proposed contract and what the district receives, the planned uses of the system, the benefits of the system in putting disparate data sources together in one place, and automating some reporting and calculations operations that we heard are currently being performed by individual administrators manually. We also talked about data ownership and access after the period of performance of the contract, the proposed contract, is over. The committee agenda contains a link to a brief video on some of the capabilities of the system. Finally, I made some remarks as chair that I will summarize here briefly. Curriculum development at York Suburban is a process that is going to continue to unfold deliberately and in the open. I would like to use the next year of the committee's work to eliminate any mystery about how we choose, align, teach, and assess curriculum. Our next meeting is on June the 6th. Mr. President, the committee recommended board approval of the K through 12 counseling plan.
Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Mr. President, the committee also recommended board approval of the contract with Harris Computer for the Ed Insight Data Warehousing Platform.
Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
What is the cost of that program?
It's around $54,000 for a 38.2 month term of the contract.
And the ultimate goal?
Well, it puts all of the data from the various systems that we're using, Acadience and IXL and all the various different platforms in one place.
Okay. Thank you.
This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you.
If there aren't any further questions, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Legislative updates.
Thank you, Mr. Posnow. Tomorrow, the House will vote on House Bill 2169, which is a bill designed to create educational savings accounts without oversight or accountability and will serve to direct public funds away from public schools toward private schools at a time when every tax dollar is badly needed by public schools. There's still time to voice your opposition to this bill if you are so inclined. Representative Jason Orchite plans to introduce legislation to assist public schools in addressing mental health needs by establishing student mental health focused grants for the 2022-23 school year. Representative Orchite is looking for co-sponsors of this bill. The Auditor General announced that school audits will no longer be carried out by his office, and this function will be returned to the Department of Ed. The Independent Regulatory Commission voted to support stronger ethics and accounting standards for charter schools. To the surprise of no one, charter schools were not pleased. If there are no questions, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Ms. Fryer, York Adams Academy.
Well, or we could do the LIU, whichever you want to do first.
Okay.
Okay. The LIU JOA met its quarterly meeting last week, and I'm pleased to report that both the health clinic at the Lancaster site and New Oxford site, both clinics have opened and seem to be well received by all the employees of the LIU. It was reported that we have been able to find some LED lights for all of the fixtures at the York Learning Center at a much reduced price from what we have been told to replace the total fixtures. This is a project that's been going on for many, many years, and we have finally decided we need to bring it to closure. So over this summer, we hope to replace all the lights themselves. Apparently, there are LED lights that can just be screwed into the fixtures that we have. So that will greatly help things and free up money at the York Learning Center for us to do some other things, such as a good coat of paint and some flooring repairs. I'd also like to report, and I have shared this with Mrs. Chichuli, that the district share of the York Learning Center budget for next year will remain the same as it is for the current year at $67,250. So that was good news. Moving on to the York Adams Academy, I'm pleased to report that we have any number of graduates on a daily basis who are completing their requirements and will be ready for graduation in June, which is always very exciting. We've had a very full calendar of people coming to talk to our students about their career choices, from airplane pilots to tattoo artists to graphic designers to people that we have that come in and help the folks fill out their applications for college. So a very busy time at York Adams Academy, and Suburban continues to use all 19 of its seats on a very regular basis. And that concludes my reports.
Okay, thank you. York Adams Tax Bureau.
I have no report, but if I could take the opportunity
Sure.
to answer Mr. Sanders' questions about Conrad Siegel. Ms. Fry provided that we paid $6,175 last year.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who has joined us tonight to sit through this with us. I am. I skipped you. I'm sorry. York County School of Technology, Ms. Schrader.
Yes, I just have a couple of points. First of all, just to share that the process is underway for the enrollment for next year. Just so you're aware, the projected enrollment at the School of Technology is 1,718 students, 1718, and they expect every chair to be filled. Also, I'd like to share that our director, Dr. Dave Thomas, has announced his plans to retire. So the JOC will be looking toward keeping the positive momentum of the School of Technology going, and the process to fill the vacancy has begun. So stay tuned for information on a new director at the School of Technology. Unless there are questions, that would conclude my report.
Thank you. Sorry for missing you. Now I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight and sitting through this. There is a link to upcoming events. There's also a link to board meeting and committee meeting schedules. Committee meetings are open. Everybody's welcome. And this is the last opportunity for public comment.
Nicole McCleary, Dunster Road. I just wanted to echo the sentiment of the public comment given at the beginning of the meeting. My father was a police officer for 30 years, ended his career as a school resource officer, where he worked hard to build relationships of trust in the districts he served. Many of our students will have little, if any, firsthand interaction with officers before they leave our schools. It is a disservice to our students and the community if we are exposing them to really only one negative side of the policing story. So I just wanted to express that. The other part of my comment has to do with IXL. I know Mr. Sears had asked some questions about, how could the board measure student growth or achievement? Should the board use IXL to kind of take a look at that? I can tell you, I've heard IXL brought up now a couple times in the last few weeks. My daughter is assigned IXL
every Monday and Wednesday night for homework. And I know there are board members who don't have kids in the schools currently, so it would be difficult to know this, but I sit beside my daughter. I still assist with homework when it's needed, and I sit there and I'm engaged. And so when my daughter does IXL, I am sitting there engaged with her, and I'm there to help her with the work. And so if she's doing something incorrectly, I teach her, and then I check her work before she submits the problem, because the answers are submitted problem by problem. So at least speaking for my daughter, her achievement and growth is way inflated because she doesn't submit any incorrect answers, because I'm there to check the work. So that's not inaccurate unless, perhaps her class is the only class that's assigning it as homework. But it is homework for my daughter, and I sit there and she does not submit incorrect answers. So that's not to say every parent does that, but if there are other parents like me out there that are doing that, then that is not an accurate gauge. I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention.
Okay, thank you.
Courtney Hendrickson, Wyndham Drive. I didn't actually have anything planned, but I have a question for you, Mr. Posnow. When people submit the minutes for the meetings, whose job is that? Like if you're recapping a meeting, whose job is that?
Minutes are taken at each of the meetings by either the chair of the meeting or by a member of the staff.
Okay. So do you all look at it to approve what is said as a recap?
Yes.
You do that together?
No, the committees do that at the next meeting.
Okay.
And then we are provided with
So all of you would have approved a previous school board meeting's minutes, is that correct? Like if someone did a recap, am I hearing you correctly that all of you would have then said, yep, that's what I heard? If it was a school board meeting.
Is it the board minutes or the committee meetings?
Board minutes, like let's say something I spoke about.
Yes.
Do you all go, oh, yep,
Yes.
that's what I heard Courtney speak about, and
Yes.
you all agree?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then I would like to make, for the record, to make sure it's really crystal clear, that when I spoke at the last meeting, I did not speak only about mail and personal or parent choice. I spoke directly about the impact that Mr. Robinson had by sending mail to my home. And somebody wrote mail and parent choice or parental choice or something like that, personal choice. And I think the part that I want to make sure is loud and clear is that what I addressed was how inappropriate your actions were. And I also want to note that the public comment that was written tonight, I happened to see that, and I wholeheartedly agree with it. I'm disappointed. Many of you, I do think, are still incredible leaders, but not one person, maybe James Sanders, said that what Mr. Robinson did was completely out of line. I never called him any names, but he did that to me. So when you write these minutes tonight, you make sure you say that you all heard me say, I did not talk about mail. I talked about what that felt like to receive mail at my public home address by a school board member that I did not come to your home. I did not write your home. And I did not call you any names. So please write that in your response. Thank you.
No. Okay, and there's nothing else. I think we're adjourned.